You're with Julian on the Brown Note and a review of the new Godspeed, You Black Emperor album. No title as of 13 February 2024, 28,340 dead. One of the cleverest titles, I think, in modern times, given it forces the listener to engage with what that death toll is now in Gaza. The band themselves are titans of the genre post-rock, a much storied style of music applied to a lot of music that doesn't conform to verse chorus song structure, but relies more on textural elements and things like Talk and their Spirit of Eden and Laughingstock albums of the very late 80s and early 90s, and Spiderland, and even Miles Davis in a Silent Way. There are fragments of what fomented the kind of music that emerged towards the middle to the late 90s. Even bands like Radiohead were lumped in, but the emergence of Godspeed You Black Emperor from Canada with the album F-sharp, A-sharp, Infinity was a landmark event of all for me. This was the golden era of post-rock, given that bands like Tortoise and Mogwai and Sigur Rós were releasing all-time classic albums in a short space of a few years. Godspeed were a very mysterious outfit. Up to 20 odd members, pretty much I think led by Efren Menuk, based in Quebec a lot, but with a roster that changed. But the opening of F-sharp, A-sharp, Infinity, with the greatest monologue in music history, "The car was on fire, no driver at the wheel," was just mind-blowing for me, and I was a huge fan. And they followed it up a few years later with Lift Your Skinny Fists Like Antennas to Heaven, another fantastic title. And the Slow Riot for New Zero Canada EP in the middle was a run of 3 classic releases. And that, much like Sigur Rós at the time, no one had ever heard anything like it. And even though other post-rock bands existed, I felt like Godspeed were the kings, because their music often involved a lot of field recordings and people talking, and these crazy barking people in the background, or train lines, and more than music itself, which seemed to fit the paradigm of post-rock. They did one less received album in 2002 and vanished until 2012, when they came back out of nowhere, thankfully, with Hallelujah Don't Bend Ascend. I feel like at that stage their music was relentless. So Lift Your Skinny Fist was a very heavy album, and their music, once they came back, seemed to exist in this ever more punishing realm of music. And they were very good albums. That one, Asunder, Sweet and Other Distress as well. They were fine albums, but I often longed for the melody and the space of F-sharp, rather than just being like this very pummeling music. I saw them live around this time, and it was like watching, I think the 3 heaviest experiences I had watching bands live were Swans, My Bloody Valentine, and Godspeed You Black Emperor, who operated this wall of noise with an equal visual representation behind them of projected carnage and apocalypse. It was a fun evening. But then something happened in 2021. They released an album called Godspeed at State's End, their finest since Lift Your Skinny Fists back in 2000, and their most redolent of F-sharp, A-sharp, Infinity, which was, for me, it was very welcome. This was much more inviting and powerfully melodic and soaring music that did hark back to their past for such a revolutionary band. But it was the crescendos and the highs and the recognizable music motifs were all over the shop, and I thought it was their best for 20 years. Now they've come back with no title as of 13th of February 2024, which I believe has been recorded quite quickly. The title itself obviously refers to the genocidal murder of the Gazans, and it feels like it as an album. So after that long preamble, what do I think of this one? The first track, Sun is a Hole, Sun is Vapors, serves as a bookend with Grey Rubble, Green Shoots. Two of the shorter tracks on the album both serve as this sort of bookend to what is essentially three massive pieces in the middle. It's got the trademark modern, ominous, apocalyptic vibe that the band are very heavily associated with, and stinging guitar lines and motifs. And this is a very lead guitar led album, more so than anything else I can think of in their catalogue. It's a very melodic album. It's very easy in my head to remember a lot of the melody lines from the guitars, which are often huge, and they often double up the guitars as well. The main components throughout are the guitars, twin guitars often, and the violin, often violins, but occasionally one violin. And it serves as an intro or an overture to the bigger tracks, and it's got this waking up to the aftermath of something terrible vibe. The second track, Babies in a Thundercloud, it's got this sort of barren windswept oscillation of, I don't know if it's synths going on, very sort of wasteland, which is what you expect. It coalesces gradually around a bass and a drum, which is a lot more sort of prominently fast than a lot of their music, before unleashing, which is probably the main motif, these huge guitar lines that sound like stadium rock, more so than anything I think they've done in the past. And around 5 minutes of this 13.5-minute track, it explodes. Not long for them, to be honest. It does explode, very triumphant, and not triumphant in a happy way, just in a determined way, like picking yourself up out of the mud. I think this album conveys what it's about without words more effectively than I can think of anything in modern music. Has this very sort of marching on vibe. And a lot of these three middle tracks recall the grandeur of some of their more melodic triumphs in the past. There's been a complaint, I've seen some, like the faint praise that has damned this album has really annoyed me. Especially considering I think it's the best since they've come back, and it's been treated as the least interesting, which is just completely mind-blowing. But one of the complaints is that they're just making music now that's very formally tied to the past. It's a past they invented. They invented this musical language. And yes, I agree that such a revolutionary band could be ploughing in new directions more. This is very much made out of styles and tropes of the early years of Godspeed. But then again, it is their style. It's something they were revolutionary in inventing in the first place. So on Babies in a Thundercloud, about 7 minutes, it drops away to nothing, and it just comes back with some more colossal guitar lines for a mind-blowing finale, which you do expect by this stage. They're not unexpected turns in these songs. And tracks 2 and 3, so Babies in a Thundercloud and the next one, Raindrops in Carstead, are probably their most engaging pieces of work, I think, since their heyday. They are giving the audience what they want from Godspeed, which is these very melodic, triumphant pieces of music that build into these huge crescendos, yes, and not challenging them. But they did come back with a raft of albums that were extremely challenging and often quite hard on the listener, but these aren't. This is probably one of their most accessible works. This has another huge stadium rock guitar line, this time in the first couple of minutes, and if you like this track, and the second guitar line and the tone of the guitars is superb in this album. If you like the one that comes in after the second guitar line tone, one of my all-time favourite tracks is Don't Let Our Youth Go to Waste by Galaxy 500, a proto post-rock tune, if ever there was one. Really reminded me of that. In the middle there's a spoken word interlude by a poet, I believe, called Michelle Fielder Fuentes, and I believe it's about Gaza, but I don't know what she's saying. The guitar lines are glorious, and there's some field recordings in here, and I do wish there were more on this album. It's hugely emotive music. It's not the standoffish oppression and punishment music that they seem to move into after Lift Your Skinny Fist. This is back to very stirring emotional music. The violin is a very winsome solo violin that leads you through to another crashing crescendo and pounding drums and bass. It doesn't sound like there is, considering that they had at some points up to 20 musicians, it really does sound like there's very few involved here. Maybe a couple of guitarists, bass, drums, and either one violin, or they're multi-tracking the violin, or there's more people on the record. But it feels like a short list of people involved in this record. I can't honestly wait to see them live, referencing this album and the last album, their two best in 20 years. It's music made for listening to live, whereas some of their first comeback stuff was to be appreciated more than loved. This is music that would really hit you in your heart a lot more. I do wonder whether I saw Swans live, and everyone should at some point in their lives. It's a notorious gig, and given their huge back catalogue, I would say they referenced their back catalogue for half an hour out of 2 hours. That half an hour was remodeled music, and then the next hour and a half was not even recorded music. The time I saw Godspeed, it was similar. They seem to be, their albums captured the music at that point, and either side of it the songs are different and there are new ones, so that's possibly what you would get. This 33 minutes of music that opens the album is incredible. I don't really know why there's a fourth track, because that fourth track, by far the shortest on the album, Broken Spires at Dead Capital, really is part of the following track. Like the music just continues, so I'm kind of curious why they cut off those 3 minutes, because Pale Spectator takes photographs at 11 minutes. That would put it in the ballpark of the other tracks, but I can pretty much treat it as one. It's I guess it serves as a mid-album palette cleanser. It's closer to drone music, and it's a lot darker and less triumphant than the two previous tracks. And there's a really great heavy toms that go ominously at the end of the track and lead into the next track, which has a very sort of medieval vibe. It's a lot more punishing and Swans-like, I guess, a bit. Different sound palette to the opening two Monolith tracks. And another huge scything riff again. Almost got these slave ship toms banging away. It is a bleaker vibe at this point. I've got a great stereo and the album on FLAC file. This isn't music for earbuds and an MP3. It has the range and depth of classical music. It's not, you're missing a lot if you try and listen to it on crap quality. At this stage it's almost industrial music again, which they have dipped their toes in many times. It's almost like you're watching a movie, which they are the most cinematic band probably of all time, who have famously not allowed much of their music to be released, apart from, I think, the F sharp A sharp track being used in 28 Days Later. Not much of their music has been allowed to be used in films, but this feels like the flashback at the midway point in a war movie where you actually see the war and carnage, whereas the rest of it's been either side of this moment, it's been after the moment, and they've been referring back to it all the way through the movie, and this is actually showing you like the come and see war torture. About 6 minutes in, it goes off on a more sort of romantic vibe. Again, it feels like movie montages shifting the scope of the film into remembrances of different periods of the conflict that they're focusing on. And there's these thrilling staccato violins as well. And almost the guitar here is almost like an Indian raga motif. And it's the equal of those monumental tracks. So the whole bulk of the album, which is the tracks 2 till 5, is, I think, their best music since Lift Your Skinny Fists, and the other albums have got probably better reviews. It ends with Grey Rubble Green Shoots, from its title alone, a more optimistic track. Can you believe that fly, the audacity? Some of it's got a very Eastern European vibe, as in a Soviet sort of republic vibe to the atmosphere and the soundstage. And this one is the final track, and it's kind of like an echo of the first one in reverse. Fabulous violin, very classical music, and a hopeful and gentle ending to things. Normally I review albums not unless I've heard them 3 times, but usually it's 4 or 5 times. This one I've had gestating for longer, since October the 4th, so about 21 days, and I've heard it multiple times. And one thing that always changes my opinion is the sit down, where I'll actually focus on the album from start to finish. That's changed my mind on so many albums, because when you're walking around and doing stuff, you hear, oh, that's a great track, oh, that's a great track. And when you sit down and focus, you think, actually, the 2 or 3 in between aren't very good. So I went from thinking this was an absolute outstanding masterpiece to wondering whether the other critics were right and that it wasn't quite so great. And then coming full circle, after I'd lived with it for a while, maybe 12 to 15 listens, coming full circle back, I really feel like this is closer to the symphonies of Gustav Mahler, my favourite composer, than it is to rock music. Gustav Mahler, I've got all 10 of his symphonies, and they're not colourful and bright like Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. They don't have the wide-ranging sounds of, operatic choruses and massive changes in the instrumentation. They take a long time to get used to. They're massive, hour-long, often quite dense, often using similar sound palettes. And it takes a while of listening to them to get the incredible satisfaction that you can out of this music. I feel the same about this album by Godspeed, which is that the more I've listened to it, it's gotten better and I've understood it more, and I feel like it's one of their most cohesive works. I feel like it tells a story from start to finish. I feel like all of the musical elements are in place as they would be in an hour-long musical symphony by someone like Mahler, which has made me really appreciate it as one of their finest. The fact that this gets less than Sabrina Carpenter's album by a lot of critics is crushingly sad. This is one of the most effective uses of instrumental music being political. Not having any lyrics, not having much in the way of words, but conveying your sentiments about something so well. Probably more than anything I've listened to in the modern era. It works as a suite from start to finish, everything in its right place. So I haven't given this score to an album since the first review I posted online on this channel, which was Black Country, New Road, Ants From Up There, the very first time I did an album review on this channel. And I'm going to give No Title, as of 13 February 2024, 28,340 dead, a perfect 10 out of 10. And if you're wondering, as of October 25th, 2024, 42,847 dead. 16,765 of those dead children under 16 murdered by Benjamin Netanyahu's racist, genocidal, warmongering government, and 10,000 people missing means that death toll is nowhere near accurate, and 100,000 more injured.